much. And there we are. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. As mentioned, my name is Ron Kehoe. I've been with Tufin for about 7 years now. Now I'm on the vendor side. Before I was on the customer side. I've been in information security for the better part of 35 years, working with a number of verticals, financial institutions, government, military, and so on. And today, the subject is going to be really around, the areas that I was most interested in when I used to be a firewall administrator way back when, was how can we eliminate manual firewall management tasks, right? The stuff that is just really considered busy work, and really allow the smart minds that are managing the network security control devices to really take on more meaningful work. As Henry was just talking, there's so much research to be done in the areas of the APTs and really making sure that your environment is properly configured. Nobody wants to be wasting their time with busy work. So this is what today's conversation is going to be really about. And we have a bit of an agenda to go through here. So let's get started with that. So we're going to start. I have a 2-minute commercial about who Tufin is, not more than that. Then we're going to talk about some of the automation capabilities. And, in the time allotted today, we don't have enough to go through everything. So it's going to be a bit of a smattering of the different automation capabilities that will help make your lives easier, okay? And one of those will be automation of cleanup and optimization of the environment. The other thing we're going to talk about is something that's been around for a while, but it's getting more attention these days, and this is around rule recertification and rule lifecycle management. I'll explain it more when we get to that section, but this is something that's a fairly new capability, which we see a lot of companies gravitating towards, and how that can be automated. And then, of course, we're all dealing with different compliance requirements, our alphabet soup of the, if it's not PCI, it's ISO, it's not ISO, it's NERC-CIP, you go through it all, right? And how are you able, in your environment, with all the rate of change that's going on, how are you able to ensure that you're continuously compliant, right? And how are you able to ensure that you're getting ready for an audit? I used to work in the financial industry, and I know that it's not just audit doesn't happen once a year. You have internal, external audits. You have regulators coming by to kick the tires. So how can you make that easier for you? How can you demonstrate and provide evidence that you are, in fact, audit ready? Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And although I have demonstrations listed here, it'll be going on and off throughout the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit and then pop into a quick demonstration. Be forewarned, I do have one recorded demonstration because the system I wanted to use to do a live demonstration, unfortunately, is not available to me anymore. So I have one recorded demonstration, and it's still going to show you how the environment works. And then finally, and as you've been doing already, please do put questions into the Q&A, and I'll address those at the end here. So we got a lot to get through. I'm going to go a little bit quickly here, and I'll try to make sure that we pause at the right points here. So again, just a quick introduction to who Tufin is. We've been around since 2005. We consider ourselves the security policy company, which means that we manage security policies. We are very close partners with Palo Alto. We manage some of Palo Alto's largest customers, but additionally, we work across different vendors and different environments. We find in extremely large organizations, not everybody has a homogeneous environment. They'll have different vendors for different purposes, and that creates some of the challenges to management. And that's what we're there to do. We're there to help automate across multiple platforms. So we know we are policy-centric security. We understand security policies. We're able to measure risk there. And we also automate network security changes. So we're actually able to accept a request, design the changes, and implement them to the appropriate devices within the environment. And that's about as far as I'll go with the commercial. So you get the idea. We are the automation company that allows you to manage your security policy irrespective of where it exists. So we're going to talk a little bit about the cleanups, right? And before we actually get into cleanups, it's better to understand, how do these policies get dirty to start with, right? So one is, network security policies get, dirty, if you want to use that word, with less than disciplined rule management. And what I mean by that is some organizations, and I've had an opportunity to work with literally hundreds of organizations in my 7 years here at Tufin. But you can tell when you're going to come into an environment that may not be following best practices with regards to how they manage security policies. It's very much an ad hoc environment. And you would think that would be the smaller companies, but it's not always that case. So, when you have environments where there's not really a structure to how they manage their environment, that's going to create a problem as far as the hygiene of their policies go. Kind of going hand in hand with that is this idea of too many cooks. Like, you have too many folks that are involved in the management process, all have dissimilar ways of doing things. Again, you're going to have problems with that when it comes to overall policy hygiene. Kind of considering down this theme, and I've seen this. And in fact, I hate to say it, but I was part of this problem at one point. Emergency changes, right? Something is down, something is broken. We need it back up. Your firewalls are breaking things. So you go ahead and maybe you put in an overly permissive rule to allow access to work, with the promise of getting to fix it later on, right? I'll take that out later, and maybe that later never comes. And so therefore now you have an overly permissive rule that is creating a larger attack surface for your environment. And then again, when everybody's good about net new, adding access and adding servers and adding this to your firewall policies, how good are we as far as removing them out, right? Removing an asset. Like, for instance, when a server is decommed, when a server is removed from the network, do you practice finding that server in all the rules that it might exist in to ensure that you're backing that out? Most organizations I've seen do it, but it's a real time suck. It's very, very difficult for them, or they choose not to do it at all, right? So and of course that does create risk, which I'll talk about in a little while. The last one, it's kind of like the timid one. Folks are afraid to, when you inherit security policies that have been there for a while, you're not sure why they're there. You're not sure what the genesis of that, some of the rules are, and you want to clean them out, but you really have no understanding as to why they're there. And so therefore you're afraid to break something. You get that analysis paralysis where you're not going to do anything. So what do we do? How do we get around this? Well, we want to clean up the policies. And why? Because it'll restore order, right? And that's going to be important, not just for an audit perspective, but it is important for that as well, but for your own manageability of the environment. Going hand in hand with that is this idea of when we have cleaner policies, when we have good policy hygiene, it reduces the attack surface, right? And that's what we're always looking for. In these days of going towards a zero trust network access or zero trust architecture, we really want to make sure that the access being granted is very concise and very purposeful, and that we're not creating we're not creating rules that are overly permissive or rules that are allowing access to servers that have been decommissioned already. So it's, this whole idea of reducing the attack surface. Not really a security concern, but a concern nevertheless is this idea of improving performance. I've seen organizations, again, in the years I've been with Tufin, that have had so many rules on their firewalls. In this case, it was not a Palo Alto firewall, just so you know, but they had so many rules on their firewalls that they were afraid to reboot it because they feared it would never come back up. And so that was a real issue, right? Too many rules, degrades performance, and it creates other issues as well. And when we take a look at having to go through a periodic review, if you're going to be practicing proper policy hygiene and you're going to be doing those cleanups, it's going to make your audit easier to pass, right? Because you're going to, A, demonstrate that you have a process in place, but B, demonstrate the effectiveness of the process, which is always going to be important as well. And then, probably the last one here is facilitates troubleshooting. If you have firewall policies that are impossible to decipher and impossible to read, and you don't know why the rules are there, if something breaks, how are you going to fix it if you're not even sure what the policy represents, right? So always good to make sure that you practice this. It makes, makes troubleshooting a little easier. So what do we see here? Typically, again, this is, more towards a heterogeneous environment, right? The problem is it's difficult to identify areas for cleanup, like shadowed rules, as an example, across a heterogeneous environment. It means you go into multiple management stations with different technologies and different ways to assess what is a shadowed rule, as an example. And of course, with shadowed rules, as an example of a cleanup, with shadowed rules, the risk is increased if you don't manage them properly. And what I mean by that is if you have a rule that's shadowed and you remove that rule thinking you're removing the access, right? Well, the access is still being granted by the shadowing rules. So therefore, it is a risk to have shadowed rules. So we want to make sure we take care of them in due time. And of course, it's time consuming to access each platform. This is part of that swivel chair management. If I have to go ahead and remove shadowed rules from vendor A and then from vendor B, and then go into Panorama and go here and there, who wants to be doing that, right? We want to make it a little easier. So how do we make it easier? The solution here is the automated deprovisioning of shadowed rules while maintaining that complete audit trail. Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed one here. And what do we look at when we take a look at network security policy cleanups? One of the areas, deleting unused rules. One of the areas, deleting fully shadowed rules, which we're going to demonstrate here in a moment. One of the areas, identifying disabled rules. And then also reordering rule base based upon usage. You want to make sure that you've got your rule base so that the most frequently used rules are at the top and the least frequency are used at the bottom. And then identifying obsolete rules that are maybe no longer required because the application's been removed. So that's another area. And and then we start talking about optimization, doing things like enforcing object name conventions, making sure that we're doing that properly, or removing unneeded network objects, right? That's also important. And then last, tightening up permissive rules. So what we're going to do is just jump in here to a quick demonstration of how Tufin allows you to quickly identify and also, and as important, remove, in this case, it'll be shadowed rules. So I'm just going to bring my screen over. And here we see the Tufin dashboard. And within the dashboard itself, it's going to give you some key indicators as to your overall environment. So I can see in my overall environment, I've got, some 6,000 rules, 6,206 that are spread across 138 devices, right? So it's my entire environment. And immediately it starts to identify things like areas for cleanup, right? So it's already telling me up front, it's giving me a performance metric that tells me that in my environment, I have 255 rules that are subject to cleanup. And if I look down here, I start seeing the details of that, right? So I can see I have a whole bunch of disabled rules, 190 of those. I have 10 unused rules, and unused in this case is unused for the last, I think it's 1 year in our example here, but you can obviously modify that metric yourself and should say unused after 3 months, I want to maybe remove the rule. And then we have the ones for fully shadowed rules as well, okay? So this gives me a measurement, and also it gives me trend lines, and it shows me how well is my program working over a period of time. So I can see that over the last 2 years, my cleanup initiatives have been doing okay. Like if I look at just, for instance, my unused rules, I did get rid of a bunch of unused rules, but we've been pretty flatlined for the last while. If I look at my fully shadowed rules, I can see that, they actually look very similar to my 401k. We see it dropping straight down and kind of flatlines there as well. And the same thing with disabled rules. So this is important because if I'm going to be demonstrating to an auditor my program, I don't want to just take a look at it at a point in time right now and say, this is how we're doing right now. This is how many shadowed rules I have. This is how many disabled rules I have, and so on and so forth. But instead, I want to show the effectiveness of the program over time. I want to be able to demonstrate that readily to an auditor. So this is part of being audit ready, having this sort of data up front. Not to mention for management, they want to keep oversight on the program. They can go to the dashboard here and see how well are they progressing towards their goals of removing all cleanup initiatives. So going back up here, we look at the rules for cleanup. And again, as I mentioned, we have some 56 shadowed rules that need to be addressed. So just by simply clicking on that, I can see that I have 56 shadowed rules that are spread across different devices. So I'm going to go and just focus on one of my devices for today, and it'll be my Palo Alto San Francisco device group. So I'm going to say apply to that. And quite simply, we're going to have our 2 rules, okay? So as a network administrator who's charged with taking care of these rules, my next step is just to look at them. And if I wanted to, I could get into more detail of these shadowed rules. So for instance, I see this rule is shadowed. If I click into there, it'll be able to give me additional detail as far as what are the rules that are shadowing this rule. So we actually get a little context into the overall environment. So I agree, this rule is shadowed, it's not required, it's not being hit, it's not serving any issue, and I can see it's not being hit because the last hit says NA, so it's never been hit. So now I can simply go through and select that rule, those rules, both of them, and I can tell Tufin to go ahead and get rid of these rules. And of course, at this point, I'm going to say remove shadowed rules from SFDG. And I can choose to either disable the rule or remove the rule. I tend to be one who disables first and make sure that nobody gets upset, and then I'll come back and delete it after a period of time. So these rules aren't disabled, so I'm going to go ahead and have them disabled, and I'm going to use the Tufin workflow, which is an automation workflow that will automatically kick off the process to have these rules removed. Now you notice it says open and secure change, because what's happening now is Tufin's reaching out to its secure change module, which is the module that does the orchestration and automation. It's creating a ticket to have these rules removed. Now, although Tufin by itself is a ticketing system, at the same time that this ticket is created in Tufin, it could have reached upstream to an ITSM like a ServiceNow, Jira, Remedy, I don't care, and it could have created a sister ticket there if that's going to be the source of truth. But either way, I see we're here, we got both rules are ready to go, and I can just hit submit. And what will end up happening now is that this rule has now been entered into the workflow. A ticket has been created, and it's going to follow the steps of the workflow in order to have that rule disabled. And that might improve that those steps of the workflow are decided upon by the business, and they'll say, well, we might want to have a business approval. We might want to stage this during, have this staged, taken out or disabled during a change window, and those sort of things can all be built in. So orchestration and automation is doing it automatically. Orchestration is making sure that we're following the appropriate business processes before we take action. But the key here is when it's finished, we're going to have a complete audit trail of all the decision points that have been made to have those rules disabled. And we had one of our customers remove some 80,000 rules in a very few months from their firewalls using this process. And the key was they had the automation do it, but they also had the audit trail to back it up. So that was pretty important. Okay, so let's go back here. So again, it's not just shadowed rules I could have disabled, although that's the one I chose for this one. It could have been, maybe something along the lines of rules that have not been hit for the last year, right? I could have called that out as well. Or maybe rules that have a violation, or rules that are tied to an application that's been removed. So just shadow is one example of a cleanup initiative. So let's go to the next slide. And so servers are being removed from production without being removed from the network security policies. Again, I see this a lot, and I mentioned this at the kickoff of the slide deck. We have everybody's good about doing net new ads. Let's add servers, let's give them access. We're all good. But when it comes now to start retiring servers and removing them, how good are we as far as removing them from the firewall rules? Some cases that can be a bit of a daunting task. And this is an excellent opportunity to use automation, because what automation allows you to do is automation allows you to quickly and effectively identify those servers where they exist, because using the firewall rules that we currently have, and then also surgically removing them from the firewall rules. So let's take a look at this. So again, the problem removing server objects is time consuming, and it's also error prone, right? If you have a very complex environment, one of our customers has over 1,000 firewalls. That's a very, very broad area to be looking for rules. And so therefore, while you might think you got them all out, maybe you didn't, right? Maybe there's something there. So again, complex environments make this difficult. The other problem here, this is the risk, right? The risk of not doing server decommissioning, right, is if I have a server that has firewall rules, that server is removed from the network, the firewall rules are not. A new server, many weeks later, is introduced to the network using the same IP address. Well, now what we start seeing is that new server will inherit all the firewall rules that the old server had. And that might be very inappropriate, right? So we want to make sure that we're decomming the servers as quickly as we can when they're removed from the network. So that's important too. And then again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. When you have different technologies involved, it's time consuming to access each and every platform. While you might go into Panorama and start hunting around to get rid of that server, and that's fine, but you might have ACLs on another device. You may have different cloud infrastructure. It might be a smattering of different technologies. So when you have one holistic platform that has visibility across the entire arena, this makes it a little easier to identify those servers and have them removed, okay? So again, the solution, server decommissioning workflow, allows for the automated deprovisioning of server access. And how I typically see customers do this is that their server team, who's ultimately charged with removing these servers, right? The server team will go ahead and create a ticket saying, I'm taking server with IP address 1.1.1.1 off the network. And then when they do that, they create the ticket. That ticket reaches out to Tufin Automation and says, Tufin Automation, this server has been taken off the network. Please delete it from the rule base. And then Tufin Automation will take off and do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like as well, okay? So I'll go back here. And what I'll do is I'll show you an existing request that's already in flight. That really talks to this. So we're going to go over here. And we'll go into the server decommissioning. And we'll call up this guy here. There we are. So this is again, Tufin's automation engine, secure change. And what's happening here is that we see that we have a server 1.1.1.1 that maybe this was fed by a upstream ITSM telling Tufin that this server is no longer on the network. So I can do an impact analysis before I go ahead and design the changes, and I'll do that. And what I'm going to find out is, where does that server exist? And I can see that that server exists across different platforms, on-prem firewalls. It exists within cloud infrastructure, bunch of different places, and the frequency of which it exists. So that's done in seconds, right? Literally, it comes back. How long would it take an engineer to pivot from table to table, from console to console, to be able to get that information? And now let's take a look at what Tufin came up with as far as a design for this solution. So it's going to design the solution across the different platforms, okay? Now, in complete transparency, some platforms we don't yet support this for, but we do support it for the main ones. Like, Palo Alto, obviously, we support it for there, but we don't support this capability within AWS just yet. But that being said, when I'm taking a look at here, I can start understanding what needs to be done. So I can see here that, and this happens to be a Cisco device, but on my Cisco ASA firewall, Tufin is going to go ahead and remove the rule. Well, I would say timeout. Why am I removing the rule when all I wanted to do is remove the server? That doesn't make any sense to me. If I look at the rule itself, I'm going to notice that the server was the last object as the source. And because of that, I want to remove the rule, because removing just the source would leave an any behind. And that's actually more problematic than just leaving that rule in as is. So we see that there, and we can see that happens a few times. And as we scroll down, let's go down to the other technologies, specifically Palo Alto. And actually, we'll go back up. There's quite a few here. And we'll go to Palo Alto. And again, with Palo Alto, we can see we're going to be removing the rule, same reason. Okay, these are all rule removals. And it's going to be for the same reasons that server object is going to be the last source or the last destination. But it doesn't always have to be that way. So for instance, over here, I see on this particular device that we are actually going to remove the host from a rule. And if I look at that rule itself by hitting full view rule, we can see that there's two destinations. One is host 1111, the one that we want to remove, and the other is 2222. So we don't want to remove the rule because this access is still allowed. We want 222 to still be accessed. We just want to surgically remove 111. So it does that very, very quickly. And even had that server object been inside of a group, we would have modified the group to remove the server object out of it. And how long does this take? Literally seconds, right? To go across the entire environment. It's not scanning your network because all the policies are resident within the database, within the Tufin database. So all it's doing is a database query saying, show me where the problems are. And now I'll come up with a design, and I'm going to go ahead and implement this design to remove those servers. I remember showing this to a customer one time out in Tucson. And when I demonstrated this capability, and it took literally from start to end 5 minutes to do the whole provisioning of the changes, he told me what I had done in those 5 minutes, or Tufin had done in those 5 minutes. It took him 2 weeks to do for another server object. So it was really, really a time saver for him. So and again, it takes just the server team to go ahead and create a ticket, and the rest can be done all the way through automation. And you can decide on how much interaction you want to have. Okay. All right. So that's, again, another area of a cleanup, which would be the server decom kind of area. Now, the next one I want to talk about is this idea of rule recertification or rule attestation. Okay, what is that, and what is it for? I mean, we talk about removing rules that aren't used, and that's good, but we should, according to various compliance requirements, we should be recertifying rules on a regular basis. So, for instance, periodic review of a security policy rule by an authoritative party. We want to be able to present rules that are owned by a business unit, or that are owned by an application owner. We want to be able to present rules to these people on a regular basis, and that might be once every 6 months, once a year, whatever it happens to be, and then give them the opportunity to make a decision as to whether or not the rules are required. Again, whether or not the rules need to be recertified. And the authoritative party in this case will either attest that the rules are needed, okay, or they're going to declare that the rules are no longer required, aren't serving any kind of business function, and therefore are no longer required. They can be removed, okay? And then, of course, this ensures that all the rules on your policy are serving a function. And that's, again, when you start talking to auditors, if you're showing them that you have this discipline to be able to do this, they're going to have a higher confidence that the rule base that you have implemented is purposeful and is only allowing the access absolutely required to be able to support your organization, okay? And of course, not only is it the right thing to do because of that sort of reason, but it's also the right thing to do from a compliance mandate perspective. And we've seen this with the European Central Bank and also with PCI DSS, is that a regular review of the security policies is necessary. So why doesn't everybody do this, right? Well, because there are some challenges around rule review and rule recertification. One of them is, how do you know who owns each rule? How can you identify the responsible party for doing the review of the rules? That can be a challenge right there. And that's probably the long pole in the tent too when you think about it. It can be very difficult. And then how do you decide on which policies need to be updated and retained and which ones disabled or removed, right? How do we get to that point? How do I decide I need to remove these 10 rules and leave these 50 behind and so on? That can also be very difficult. And then finally, how do we ensure that the requested access is only available for as long as it's required? I'll give you an example. When I used to work at the bank, we'd have consultants come on board. And while they're there, they'd be granted access to the network for a very limited period of time. And how do we make sure that we come back at the end of that period of time and pull that access back out? Well, that would be a recertification as to whether or not the rules are required. We would mark them with a drop dead date. And at that drop dead date, we come back to the business owner and say, does that consultant still need this access? Yes, then we'll extend it. No, then we'll remove it altogether. So how Tufin does this, Tufin provides something that is very difficult to do and makes it much easier through automation. And what you're seeing in front of you now is, again, SecureTrack is Tufin's visibility into your network, right? SecureTrack has visibility into every single rule on every single device that Tufin is managing on your behalf. And within that, it works alongside of something that we call the Rule Lifecycle Management app. And that is essentially the coordination point, if you will, that coordinates the various users in order to make a decision as to whether or not a rule is required. So SecureTrack will retrieve rules requiring recertification. How does it know that? Metadata on every single rule. Every rule has metadata that identifies when it was last recertified and when it's due to be recertified again. When that date approaches, and that's configurable by you, but when that date approaches, we're going to reach out to the business owner and say, here are a bunch of rules that we need you to make a decision on. The RLM, it's able to identify the business owners. Okay, now this is an interesting part. This is really where the magic happens. The RLM will work in concert with a source of truth. And typically with most customers, we see that source of truth as being a CMDB. We're able to map asset to owner within a CMDB, and then in turn, use the asset within a rule to map the owner to those rules. So, and will it capture 100% of the rules? No, probably not. Will it capture 80 to 90% of the rules? Yes, it will. And then the other rules will require still some level of manual intervention. So it makes it easier. It doesn't make it totally easy, but it makes it much, much easier. So the RLM, armed with this knowledge of who owns rules, the RLM is able to then reach out to the rule owner and notify that rule owner that they have rules that need to be reviewed, right? To make sure that they're still serving the business function. The rule owner will be presented access to the console, right? So now we have a centralized console where everybody can work together. The rule owner comes to the console and makes the certification decision, either certify or decertify the rules based on their understanding as to whether or not they're needed or not. The RLM then will reach out to our secure change. And again, this is our orchestration and automation arm. And if the decision is made to recertify the rule, secure change will simply update the metadata on the rule saying the rule was recertified effectively today. The rule needs to be recertified again in 1 year, as an example, right? That's it. Those changes are done automatically, and we're off to the races. On the other side, though, if the rule owner decides to decertify the rule, then what we're going to see happen is that secure change, the rule lifecycle management capability will pass the secure change instructions to disable the rule. Again, we're not going to delete, we're going to disable. So it goes back to the RLS, back to secure change. Secure change will then, through an automated workflow, disable the rule, and also within the metadata, mark the rule as decertified. So when we look at it later on, we'll say, oh, this rule is disabled because it's decertified. So we have that evidence as well. Okay. And of course, there's always going to be, in a perfect case, everything gets resolved right away. But, we may have instances of where rules may be owned by more than one business owner. And we can account for that, right? We have more than one business owner. We can say, okay, well, owner one said they want the rule removed. Owner two said they still want the rule to be certified. And so therefore we can kick it off to another workflow to surgically remove owner one's interest in the rule and leaving owner two with the rule that they want to support their environment, right? And also maybe the owner disagrees that he's not the owner of the rule, in which case he can push it back to the default group and they can make further decisions. So again, this makes life a lot easier when it comes to doing rule recertification. And where I've seen this being used most right now is within my customers with very, very high compliance requirements, right? Regulatory controls. So that would be mostly, we see that within the financial institutions, and also we see it within our energy companies, our utilities. They're the ones that have been most likely to take this on. Okay, so we're going to go through this demonstration next. Now, this demonstration is going to be it's a recorded demonstration because, again, I didn't have the system available to me. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long, and I'm going to be playing the audio over the presentation. And Katie, if you're there, if you can't hear the audio when it starts, let me know, and I'll step in the best I can. So let's go ahead and do the demo, and stand by. Okay, so as mentioned, the Rule Lifecycle Management application will periodically check the current status of rule recertification. And when a rule is due to be recertified, it'll reach out to the business owner via an email message to notify that person to recertify the rules. Here's an example of what that message looks like. So now I'm simply going to go ahead and click the link to be able to access the Rule Lifecycle Management app. Okay, now just go ahead and I'm going to enter in the credentials and log in. Okay, so as a general user, what I'm going to see first is the rules that are in my queue that need to be processed. So here I can see I have some 27 rules that require attention. So at this point, the owner of the rules can review the rules in question, and they can see that they are the owner of this rule, and they can scroll down and view the various rules that are here. But at some point, they'll need to make a decision as to what to do with this rule. So they can select all the rules, a subset of the rules, to either certify or decertify the rule. So I'm going to go ahead and certify the 2 of my rules. I've selected them. I come over here and I click Certify the Rules. Now those rules have been put into the queue. I can see I'm now my pending rules, and I have 2 rules that I've just put into the queue right here, and they are wanting to be certified. And the 3rd rule here, this was already in the queue. And the reason for this is that actually this is waiting for other owners who may have an interest in the rule to make a decision as to whether or not this rule should be certified or decertified. But notwithstanding, my 2 rules are there. So now let's take a look at this from the perspective of the Rule Lifecycle Management app administrator. So as an administrator, and I'll go to that screen right now, as an administrator, get a lot more options available to me. So from the very start, I can see, how many rules have been certified, how many have been decertified, and so on. And I also see per user how many rules do they have that need some level of activity. For instance, S. Jones, we know that he had 27 rules that needed to be taken care of.
I'm not going to go through all these options, just kind of give you a quick flavor for what it looks like from this perspective. I can then also look at the current tickets that are in flight. So what we're seeing here is that there are a lot of tickets that have been through, and we see that certified rules for device ID2, which is the device that those two rules that were just certified were on, action certified, progress, the ticket has been closed already. So what this means is that those two rules have already been certified just by simply clicking, certify, and let the automation run the rest of it. So that was actually a very quick action on that behalf. Now let's take a look at the other side. I'm going to go back into my generic user, my S. Jones account. And now that I'm back in as my S. Jones account, I can see that in my pending rules queue, I only have that one rule now that is still waiting for other users. And this has been there for some time while we're waiting for the other users to make their decision. If I go back into my queue, I can now choose additional rules to take a look at. So I'm going to choose 3 rules this time, and I'm going to have these rules decertified. And by decertifying, what I'm going to be doing is disabling the rules. So I choose to decertify the rules. They go into my pending queue. And again, we have 4 rules because there was already one there. And we can see that 3 are set to be decertified. These 3 here. Again, if I jump back as the administrator, so now I'm acting as administrator, and let's see if there are any tickets being processed now. So I'm going to go to the pending queue. That's my pending queue. And back, and what we can see here is that the ticket to decommission the rules has in fact been entered as secure change ticket number 52. The subject was disable rules in device 2, automatically entered. The action was to decommission the rule, and we can actually see it's completed. So the ticket now is closed. So those rules, those 3 rules that we had just selected, now have been disabled, and the number of rules identified and when it was completed. So that's good. So it actually did show that it was able to go through and disable the rule. Now what I want to do just here quickly is I'm going to go into Secure Track, just very, very quickly. And you can see I'm looking at the rule viewer, and I've already issued this query, but I'm looking for any rules that have been disabled today. And we can see that those 3 rules that were all on device ID 2 are in fact now disabled. So, rule lifecycle management, very, very useful tool, helps to automate the recertification process by identifying rules and rule owners, creating that linkage, notifying rule owners when their rules are due to be reviewed, allowing the rule owners to log into a common platform to execute their decisions, either to recertify or decertify rules, and then to use the automation of secure change to go ahead and take that action.
Okay, so hopefully that was helpful to you, and again, demonstrates the decertification process and how it works, or I should just say rule recertification, because it includes both certification and decertification. Okay, so we won't play that again. Okay, now the last part I want to talk about, I know we're getting very, very short on time here, so I'm just going to kind of just skip very quickly about audit readiness, okay? We don't have enough time to go through everything that Tufin does to make you audit ready, but understanding that the expectation from auditors overall, and this is not really tied to any single compliance mandate, but we can cite things like PCI and NERC-CIP and some others, but I mean, really, the expectation is that you are somehow staying on top of your rules, and also that you understand your rule base and you understand that it's following corporate segmentation policies, right? And so how does Tufin help you out there? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip from the slide deck and go right in and showing you how Tufin allows you not to just measure compliance once in a while, but how it allows you to measure compliance all the time. And this is going to be a very quick 2-minute demonstration to show you how that works. Okay, so I'm back in Tufin right now, and I go back to Secure Track, which is our visibility and compliance monitoring. And within Secure Track, and just a quick primer here, Secure Track will always have the latest configurations from every single firewall that we're managing, or for that matter, cloud infrastructure, whatever it's coming from. We have all the policies within Tufin. Anytime a change is made, like somebody goes into Panorama, commits a change, we're going to get notified of that. We're going to pull in that policy back into Tufin, right? We're going to have it with us all the time. And what we do with that policy, amongst many, many things, but one of the things that we also do is we measure to see whether or not the policy is in alignment with our corporate segmentation policy. And our corporate segmentation policy might be based off of a compliance mandate like NERC-CIP, like PCI I've been talking about. It might be industry best practices like ISO 27,000, I should say. Or it might also be just your own corporate best practices or a combination of all three. But either way, the policy is meant, the segmentation policy is meant to look at your rule base and ensure that the rule base is in compliance. If you have 50,000 rules, who is going to be able to visually go through all those and make sure that every single rule is compliant? You know, it's just too much. This is a great opportunity for automation. So with this matrix is essentially our compliance matrix. On the left-hand side, all these different names, agency, Amsterdam, AWS, all these names here are simply segments of my network, and they're repeated across the top. These are, you know, IP segments of my network, right? Like DMZ, for instance, and external and private cloud and whatever. Where the segments or where these two intersect, that block tells me what's allowed or what's not allowed. So for instance, any firewall rule that's governing access from my DMZ to my agent sanctioned network, nothing is allowed. There should be nothing allowed. If somebody creates a rule allowing access, that would be considered a violation. Okay. Conversely, if somebody created access that allowed access from Amsterdam external to Amsterdam external, we don't care. Everything's allowed, right? We're not going to measure that because it's all, you know, the same happy network, no problem. But how about from the DMZ to the AWS Exchange environment? Let's take a look at that. So now we start seeing is we can either create a whitelist or a blacklist. This happens to be a whitelist. We're only allowing specific protocols. And we see HTTPS, SSH, and you know, really, you would follow the corporate mandate as to what this should be. Maybe we want to allow Gmail, which of course is an app ID, right? We understand app ID and we use app ID. Maybe we want to support web browsing. If we can spell it right. There we are, which again is an app ID or SSL protocol. We put that in as well. So we can measure not just based off of, you know, standard TCP UDP ports, but we can actually take a look at from an app ID and measure compliance as well. So if somebody creates a rule that says allows telnet from the DMZ to AWS Exchange, that would be considered a violation. And this compliance is not being measured once in a while. It's being measured every time a change is detected. Okay, I'm very, very low on time, so I'm going to go right to the Q&A here to see what we have going on. So we'll pull this over here. Question is, does Tufin scan HP or Cisco switches for legacy ACLs? It does with Cisco. It's one of our partners, and not with HP today. So we have a list on our website. It has all the supported products that we have today. One of the things to note, though, is that we've recently developed an open policy model that's going to allow us to onboard devices much more quickly than we did before. We just announced support for a number of SD-WAN solutions that we're bringing in. And of course, you know, we work very, very closely with Palo Alto. As I mentioned earlier, we support Palo Alto better than anybody in our spot. And we have, again, Palo Alto's largest customers use Tufin for their automation. And does your RLM map subnets to owners as well? Yes, it does. It can do that. It'll use subnets and use objects. So I'm very, very sorry. I don't have any time to go through additional questions. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back to Katie.
Ron, you actually have a couple more minutes if you want to answer both of those.
Oh, questions. Do I? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was done at the top of the hour.
We're going to give you a couple more minutes, so it's okay.
Okay. So let's see. Question. Okay. So the question I'm seeing here is, why should we have to buy another product that easily removes shadow rules? And something, you're right. So you can use Palo already to get rid of shadowed rules. But if you want to think about it in the larger scheme of things, right? If you are a Palo only shop, there are a lot of things that Palo can do, which is great. I mean, it's a fantastic partner we work with, but understand it's not just removing the rules, it's creating the entire audit trail of what's being done. So when somebody wants a rule removed, it's not just saying, okay, let's go ahead, Tufin, and remove the rule. I mean, anybody can do that, right? But it's actually creating that audit trail of what's been done. So for instance, let me see if I can find one of my tickets here. And I'll show you what, and this audit trail can be, obviously examined by auditors and regulators and the like. But what it's going to allow me to do is get that level of visibility. So it's more than just bringing up the, and I'm just having trouble with I think my system's gone to sleep. Here it comes. Up here. Okay. I should have needed to go over here. Sorry about that, I'm in the wrong section. Yeah. So it's going to create the full audit trail, and that's going to be important, and the decision points of who's allowed to do what, like when a ticket's being entered, who should have the visibility, the workflows will give you who should have the visibility into making decisions about changes being made. But also what Tufin allows you to do is, even in an environment that's only Palo Alto, right? It's our ability to understand the entire network, right? Understand what your network looks like when it comes to designing changes. So we can see very concisely what your network looks like because we automatically generate a map based on our understanding of all the devices that we're consuming. And if I want to group these together, I can see them by my various areas. I can do it by various domains, various technologies, but I'm able to actually see into my environment. And now when we start doing things like troubleshooting between a source and the destination and doing a find path, this will be able to tell me whether or not a path exists between the source and the destination. And you can see here, it was able to tell me that this path from the source to the destination is not working, not because that there's a problem with the firewalls, but there's a problem with the routable network. So it's more than just shadowed rules. The shadowed rules is just one area that we take care of. It's also the metadata that we look at, rules that have not been hit in the last year, that we can come back and say, okay, a rule's not been hit in the last year, but also the metadata says that this rule is a disaster recovery rule. So therefore, I'm going to keep this rule, if that makes sense. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. Any other questions? I think that one we did live. And I think that's all I see for now. So again, we work across multiple different platforms. The more complex the environment, the better. And, we work both, and we're able to map topology from on-premises all the way up to and including into the cloud. And that allows us to decide, if we have to update your Palo Alto firewall rules and that firewall is on premises or is in the cloud, we're able to decide what that path is and how to update the firewalls appropriately. We fully understand things like FQDN objects. We fully understand EDLs. We fully understand the use of app ID and user ID. So we are very much in tune with Palo Alto's next-gen firewall features. And we continue to add to those, even getting into the point of URL filtering as an automation task. We're not there yet, but that's a roadmap item for us. So does Tufin use Palo as their primary security solution? We're a partner to everybody, right? We try to we try to take care of the hybrid heterogeneous environment. So Palo Alto is a key business partner of us. I mean, Palo Alto has obviously grown substantially in the last while, and we respond as our customers respond. But we support the checkpoints, we support the Fortinets, we support Cisco's, and so on and so forth, right? So we try to be that one platform, the one management platform to rule all the other management platforms. Okay. All right, got that. Correct. So regarding domain EDLs cannot be used as a destination or source in the policy. Correct. So EDLs we have visibility into, but we can't use it. We don't use it that way. We use it within the security profiles. So hopefully that answers that. Okay. I think that's it. All right. I'll put it back to you, Katie.